Hello and welcome to episode 50 of the Page One podcast. I'm Tarek.
I'm Marco. Episode 50.
We made it.
A half century. Incredible.
50 episodes, 49 guests. Is that right?
And 3 listeners. No.
Me, you, and my mum.
Yeah, exactly.
Episodes,
it's an incredible milestone for us anyway. We never thought we'd get here, and we've had some great guests on in the past. So if this is your first episode of the Page One podcast, thanks for joining us. At the Page One podcast, we'd like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing process, how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we have now got a great back catalogue of previous guests, people like Sarah Pimborough, Tim Lebin, Joe Cornish, Alistair Campbell. There's a whole list of people there. If you go onto our website, the link's in the bio, or look on your podcast app, then you'll see all the past great guests, and hopefully there'll be some there that you're wanting to hear. And we've got another great guest this week, but before we get on to that, Tarek, speaking of writing and breaking into the industry, I believe you have some news that you could share with the listeners.
I do. I'm very, very pleased to announce that all the three listeners out there can look forward to purchasing my first book. You can buy it in October 2021, a year from recording, and it's a detective thriller set in a fictional town of Cooper, Nebraska, and it's a...
And what's it called?
Welcome to Cooper. Sorry, I should have probably said that earlier.
Yeah, that's you're just getting to grips with the selling of this thing.
Yeah, a long way to go.
It's a great book. I have had the privilege of reading it, and I would say it's very much in the vein of a sort of literary detective novel, noir almost.
Yeah, kind of go for that
true detective kind of story. Yeah. So very excited, very proud to host a podcast alongside you, and also I hate your guts. I can feel these two states at once.
I will only be acknowledging people who buy the ebook version.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, of course. Your publisher, of course, is an ebook specialist, so there's no surprise there. Of course,
I will be pushing ebooks harder than ever.
Now we suddenly understand
the long game.
Yeah, exactly. That's very exciting news, and we will obviously let you know more about Welcome to Cooper closer to the time of release.
Absolutely.
But on to this week's guest.
This week we're chatting with Peng Shepherd, who her first novel is The Book of M. It came out last year, and to very wide acclaim, it won a number of literary arts awards.
Mm-hmm.
It was chosen as the best book of the year by Amazon, by Elle, by The Verge. The Today Show were raving about it. It's a fantastic. It's a kind of... How would you describe it, Marco?
I think if you've read something like Station 11, it's in that sort of vein of a literary, a post-apocalyptic thing, but not apocalyptic in the sense you might think. It's not a zombie disease. It's people's shadows start disappearing, and with those shadows are the memories of the people. It's a really unique and original idea, I think. And it tells a very personal story as well. You've got, it's got a good, exciting plot to it as well. But the characters in it are really, really well crafted, I thought.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when it's a post-apocalyptic kind of world, more time is almost spent on the world itself and the destruction, etc. But yeah, this one really does take care of the character level stuff, and it's an excellent read. It reminded me a little bit of The Leftovers, that kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the sort of what happens when you're left behind, obviously, like
exactly,
The Leftovers,
yeah,
and it also had sort of things like if you've read The Passage as well, that sort of it's a really well written literary genre book, if you like. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So we really enjoyed it, and we really enjoyed speaking to Peng. So we'll get straight into the podcast after a quick advert for our Writer's Notebook, page 1. And then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest, who is another great one.
Absolutely. But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome.
But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Did you always want to write? Was that always your goal?
Yeah, it was. I've told the story a couple times, but when I was, I think about 4 or 5, I wrote, quote unquote, my first book. It was about a spider. I think his name was Stanley, and he was very nice, but everyone was afraid of him. But he was so nice, and he just wanted friends. So I wrote it and I illustrated it and I showed it to my mom, and I was like, "Look, I wrote a book." And she, bless her heart, has always been so supportive of that passion I had. And so she actually took the pages that I had written to her work, and she got them laminated and then had like a little spiral, spine put in it. And she brought it home and she was like, "Look, here's your book." And I had thought
published already.
that I'd got published. So that was a great year. That was a great year. And then, eventually I found out that's not really how it works, but that was really the start of it. It was so exciting. And I just, kept writing ever since.
Cool. And did you, when did you sort of decide, right, this is what I'm going to do for a career? Obviously, I think you did the NYU MFA in creative writing. Is that right? Yeah.
So I wrote obsessively all through like middle school, high school. And then I got to university and I was like, right, now I'm going to do it. Now, I can take classes in whatever I want, and they've got creative writing here, and I'm going to get an undergraduate degree in creative writing. I'm going to write my first book. And then I just promptly chickened out and didn't take a single creative writing class my whole undergrad, because, I don't know. I guess it was just scary when you can finally go for it, because then you can finally fail, Yeah. And so I actually got a degree from undergrad that had nothing to do with creative writing. And then I went on and got a master's in international studies of diplomacy, which also had nothing to do with creative writing. And I worked for, like 4 or 5 years in it was really interesting, but it was also really high stress and really long hours kind of job. And didn't write at all the whole time. And that was kind of at the end of those couple of years. I was reaching a point where I was either going to probably get promoted, and it would really, it kind of a point of no turning back.
And kind of like you get on the train tracks and it's hard to get off at that point.
Right, yeah. And so I just thought, I think this job is interesting, but it is not, my passion. It's not really what I had dreamed my whole life of doing. And so I just thought, I've got to try, before it's too late.
Yeah.
I mean, it's never too late, but I felt like it would be, if I didn't try now, it would be a really long time before I'd ever work up the courage again. And so I applied to MFA programs, and I got into NYU, quit my job, moved back. I was living in London at the time, so moved back from London to New York, and then it went from there.
Wow. And I mean, that's obviously a pretty bold move to make. And but I think you do have to follow that kind of urge and, give it a shot at least and try. And what's it like? What's the MFA course like? What do you get taught on that course that you can then use afterwards?
So I think a lot of each program is really different. I've heard that, for example, at Columbia, I think they have a lot more classes, like on craft or reading or literature. The NYU program is a studio-based program, and that just means that there's a lot more time for you that you're just supposed to be spending writing rather than sitting in class listening to a lecture. So we actually only had one craft class per week, and then we had one workshop per week, and you were supposed to be, writing the rest of the time. And so, I mean, I did learn a lot in the craft classes because I had never been reading so much, so quickly and talking about it in such depth because I'd been working full time. And so I did learn a lot in the craft classes, but I think the most valuable thing about the MFA was that it gave me all that time to write. And it also gave me permission to be writing because, I had deadlines, and it was for a degree, and I had, professors and other students waiting for my work in workshop. And so it really, it taught me, I think, how to be professional about it and be dedicated the way that you really have to be dedicated if you're going to finish a whole novel.
And that it's interesting because I think so much of writing must be the kind of psychological side of it, of, because you can try and write on the side when you're working a job, but you're totally right in that you're going to get totally different and probably lesser work than if you're just immersed in the world of writing for that time. And you do have that permission, is probably the right word, where you don't have to feel guilty about not spending time with your family or whatever, because you've got all day to do some writing, and that must make a massive difference, just that mental switch.
Oh, it went from like the last priority in my life to being the first priority.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was huge.
And when you emerged from that course, were you working on the Book of M at that time, or was that something that came later? What did you work on?
Yeah, so I spent the whole degree working on a novel. It was a fantasy novel that now lives in my drawer. It'll probably never come out, but I love it, so it's my baby. But I had a professor there named Darren Strauss who told us our first semester, because it was our first day of our first semester, and we were all working on the novel that was going to get published, and he said to us, I don't want to discourage all of you, but I want you to be, I just want to let you all know that oftentimes it is, it's already very rare and special to finish a book and get it published. But he said, it's definitely not going to be the thing that you're writing in the MFA. It's going to be the thing that you start right after the MFA that really has a really good chance of being it. And that was what was true for me. The Book of M, I started right just a couple of months after I graduated, I think. And that was the one that made it.
And that book that you were working on during the course, did you even consider sort of sending that out and try to get an agent and trying to make that one work, or did you think, right, that's been good, but I'm now going to do something else?
I did. I sent it out, but in a really informal way, because at MFA programs, there's often like once a year, a kind of agent meet and greet where a couple of agents will come and talk to you about, talk to your whole class about what they do and how you work with them. And at the end of it, they often offer to kind of informally look at something you're working on if it's at a stage that they can, it's final or polished enough. And so I did give it to two agents who gave me really nice feedback, but it wasn't ready yet because it was only half written anyway. And so by the time I had totally finished it, I knew that it was this really special thing for me. And I had learned so much writing it, and I will always love it, but it was definitely not, nobody else should read this book.
So Book of M, how did you come up with it? Because for anyone who's not read it, it's a it's a real cool mashup of like a literary post-apocalyptic kind of world where I won't give anything away, but people start to lose their shadows and start to lose their memories along with it. And where did that idea come from?
So I grew up reading and loving genre fiction primarily. I didn't read a lot of literary fiction until I got to the MFA. And even though NYU is a genre-friendly program, we mostly read literary fiction in our craft classes, and that was the stuff we were discussing. And so I think that's how it ended up being a mashup, because I had all this personal history and love for genre fiction, and then this very newly discovered love and study of literary fiction, and it just kind of bled. They just kind of bled into each other. But the thing I started with was just the shadows, because I thought, wouldn't it be cool if somebody lost their shadow? And then you say, what? Okay, so one guy loses his shadow. What happens next? What happens next?
Yeah.
And what was the process for that, and what is your process generally? I mean, are you someone that spends a long time researching and planning, or do you sort of get the idea and just start and see where it takes you?
Yeah, the second one. My process is I have absolutely no process.
Okay.
I know that a lot of writers don't like the whole plotter versus pantser, nomenclature, whatever. But if we were going to use that, I am 100% a pantser. I cannot plan anything. I cannot outline anything. I don't make like character sheets or timelines or, anything like that. I just get in there and make as big of a mess as possible, and then kind of see what I've got.
And well, does that? It's funny because we were speaking to someone else just recently, and they sort of said that if people that don't outline, they'll do that first draft, but that first draft is almost like normally it doesn't come out that clean, so it's almost like a plan, a long plan, if you like, that you can then work. Is that how it works for you?
Yeah, I guess my first draft, because I have no idea where it's going and I haven't planned anything, tends to be really, really long and really meandering. And the characters kind of don't really know what they want yet, or they don't know kind of who they're in love with. And they don't really say that much. They're just really quiet, and they're just like walking to a bunch of places and looking at a bunch of things. And, like, all of us are together trying to figure out what's important here, like me and the characters. And so I don't even know if I could really call the first draft an outline for me either, because it's just so big, and it's almost more just like looking at a map of a place that you have never been to, and you're just kind of looking at it and being like, right, okay, what's interesting here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So here's a world, and what can I pull out from it, kind of a thing. Yeah.
And because obviously part of the book is about your shadow gets lost and your memories kind of go along with that, and so from what you're saying, the kind of nut of the idea was the shadows vanishing. So I'm assuming that the memory loss part of it came afterwards. And was that, when you sit down to write something, is it important to you to tell a important story? Like, was it, because for me anyway, I definitely got a sense it was kind of like an Alzheimer's type kind of allegory. But is that maybe not something, because I wondered, were you aiming for that, from the start, but was that something that just kind of came in organically and just slotted in nicely?
It the funny thing about it was the memory loss came early, because I once the first guy in the book lost his shadow and then it started spreading, I realized that I had to make it mean something, because if you just lose your shadow but absolutely nothing else happens to you, it's just kind of pretty, but it's not that serious. So the memory loss was the first thing that came, and I didn't get to the magic of it until I had finished the first draft, because I realized that it still didn't really mean that much if just this beautiful thing happens to you and then it becomes really terrible, but there's nothing you can do about it and there's no other side to it. And so the magic was really that was, I guess, what I discovered in the rewriting of it. But you are, as I'm sure you two know, often so close to the material as you're writing it that I didn't realize the kind of resonance it had with Alzheimer's or dementia or other kinds of memory loss until I had given the book, probably in its second draft or something, to a couple of writer friends who were also readers, and they all commented on it. And you're like, yes, that is exactly But I don't know, maybe, but I think that's maybe the best way, because even though I didn't know that's what I was doing, maybe it made it more true or more real than if I had been purposefully trying to say something symbolic.
Yeah, sometimes if you're trying to say something, it can come across as too forced in the story. Yeah. So yeah, that could be. And the story opens, or it's got a very sort of cold open, and then the initial you learn about the first person that loses the shadow a bit later on into the book. So was that as part of the process of rewriting that you decided to sort of restructure it in that way, or did you always have that first vision of the deer on the road?
That came pretty early. I think in the very, very beginning, when I was just a few pages in, I thought that the story was going to be really short, and it was just going to be between Ori and Max, who are the two main characters. And I thought, I didn't even know if they were going to leave that house that they starred in. Mm-hmm. And I had envisioned this really kind of tight domestic drama. But as I started writing, I got past the deer, and the whole world just kind of opened up, I guess. I was not intending to write. I think the book's about 150,000 words, so it's pretty long. And it goes, across multiple countries, and it moves back and forth across 2 or 3 years, I think. And that was not, I did not, plan any of that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's changed completely from your small, short location drama to a massive epic, spanning years in the whole globe. And when you're writing that, I kind of wonder what your process is in terms of drafts. How do you know how many drafts do you do as a starter, and then how do you know when you've done enough drafts and when something's ready?
Yeah, I think for the Book of M, I did. Well, I wrote the whole thing, so I guess that's the first draft, and then I revised it 3 times, I think, and it was. I don't know if I could say how I knew, or how one can know for sure that something's done, and especially because it was my first book. And so my fear was that I would not know when it was done, because I'd never finished anything to that level before.
Yeah.
But I think, so it took about 9 months to write the first draft, and then I revised it. I did like 3 passes over the next 6 months. And I remember as I was getting to the end of that third pass at the end of 6 months, there was just this feeling of like, I kind of knew on a gut level that it was done, and I couldn't see myself anything else that I would change about it, because even when I would finish the first draft, or finish the first revision, and I sent it to my friends, I still knew there were problems. I just didn't know how it was going to fix them.
Yeah.
And, and then kind of the same thing with the second draft. I knew there were still some smaller problems, but I just didn't know what I was going to do about them. And so I wanted my readers to tell me, what they thought. But when I got to the end of the third draft, there was just this feeling of, no book is ever perfect. It can't be perfect, but it just felt complete in a way that it hadn't felt the first 2 times I hit the end of that revision.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's just a gut thing.
I mean, it's interesting because especially if you're a first time writer, it can be very difficult to know, you always feel, or certainly I've found that you always feel like, oh, there's something else that I could go back or maybe that would work better if you did that. I mean, do you find, in between the drafts, you take a bit of time off and then go back to it almost with a fresh pair of eyes, or do you just get it done and then go straight back into the next revision?
Yeah, I wish I could do that. But time is really important for me. I have to take at least a month or two off, which is the whole time you're so restless and you're so impatient because you want to get back to it. But if I go back too soon, I don't do anything to the draft that's worth it. And so that's been a really difficult but necessary lesson to learn for me.
Yeah, no, it's a valuable lesson to learn as well. I think, especially for people that are starting out, because I know a lot of people who listen to the podcast are like that, you know, to take that time away from it makes a huge difference, actually.
Yeah, I find if I go back too soon, I'm just like, this is perfect. It doesn't need to be here at all. And so once you'd done your 3 drafts and your gut was telling you it was ready to go, what was your next step? Then how did you go about trying to get the book out there?
So it was kind of throughout the 3rd draft, I had started making a list of agents, and you know, going through other books that I loved, seeing who they thanked in their acknowledgments, because that's usually how you can find agents. And then I also signed up for Publishers Marketplace, which is a really useful website because it just, you know, lists everyone there. And so when I reached the end of that 3rd draft, I made like a dream list, and then I made, you know, if those people don't like my work, here's my 2nd list of agents I really, really love. And I tried to kind of organize it by who I thought would be interested in the kind of book that it was, because it is sort of it sits across a couple genres. Yeah. And then I just emailed them and, you know, spent the next week just sitting in
looking at every email, every ping from your email inbox. And what, you know, how long did it take to find an agent then?
I think I was just so lucky because it only took about a week.
Wow, that's fantastic.
I know. It still felt like a year. I mean, I was still just beside myself staring at my inbox, but oftentimes what happens is you just kind of need one to read it and get interested. And then, you know, it is polite to tell the others that someone is interested because they, you know, it's just polite. And so I did that, and that's kind of often kicks off a quicker reading for everybody else. And then,
absolutely.
you know, so yeah, that was very surprising and very amazing. So, yeah.
Once you got the agent, then did it take long to then find a publisher, or was it quite a quick process there as well?
Yeah, that ended up being pretty quick. The agent that I signed with, she thought, and I really liked this approach, actually. So I was expecting to sign with an agent and then, I don't know, spend another like year or two revising or something, because that seems to be, you know, when you read different accounts from different writers, often they say that they sign and then, but my agent said that she thought the book was ready enough to go to editors and that she could, you know, make me revise it a couple more times, but that she was worried that if she and I were to revise it a lot, it would be something that she would want to publish, not something, you know, it would become kind of her book almost rather than my editor's book. And so she wanted to leave room for the editor to be able to see themselves in the book and to work with me on that. And so I think she and I tweaked it for about another week. And then I signed with her in 1 week. And then we got the book out.
I hate you, Peng. I hate you.
It was, I mean, I don't know, but I did. I mean, I think after the book was bought, my editor and I did we do 2 rounds? And that was, I don't know, probably 9 months when all was said and done, I think. So I did end up, you know, revising it with my editor after it was sold. But the process at the start of it it went really fast.
And then once you'd signed with the publisher, and you got some notes from them, I take it on redraft and stuff. You know, what's your approach to receiving notes? Because obviously we've had this chat with a few folk before in the past, and And there's always that kind of, gut reaction of, I don't like that really much. You put that to one side. And how do you deal with notes, and if you don't agree with them, and what's your process for that?
Yeah, I love notes actually, and I don't get, even if they're pretty tough, it doesn't really hurt me. It just feels like, we're just talking about my book. We're not talking about me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want, each book that I write to be the best book that it can be. And so it's all right if the notes are harsh or extensive or, but I don't remember disagreeing with any of the notes from my editor. They were mostly notes of like, could you, clarify this or that, or can you make the love story more apparent in this part? Or it's been kind of a long time since we've heard from so-and-so, maybe they can come back. And so it just felt like really, really important refining that my editor and I were doing of the story.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we really had a conflict over anything, which was, that's easy.
Yeah.
It makes it easy.
I mean, it sounds like you've had the dream process basically from start to finish.
It doesn't make it any less terrifying, I guess. But,
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Obviously, the book in a way as well, and I have to ask this question. I hate having to ask it, but given everything that's going on in the world at the moment, the book is kind of like a pandemic type book. This
sure.
Epidemic that takes away people's shadows, and now, of course, there's COVID. I mean, obviously, you wrote it well before the current epidemic, but it struck me that there's, the bits in the hotel after the wedding when they're watching the news, when they're going into town to buy food, and there's panic and all this sort of stuff. That all I felt was quite, it's turned out to be quite an accurate portrayal. I mean, was there anything that you wrote, having now experienced what COVID is like, obviously a different thing, that makes you think, oh, maybe that bit in the book should have been different, or anything like that?
Oh, different. I don't know. It's been really eerie for sure. Because I wrote the first draft in 2016, and the book came out in 2018, so it was well before. And I remember writing little things like, there were some people that hoarded, 40 something bottles of shampoo in there.
Yeah.
And at the time,
that was a line that held up to me as well. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the time when I picked that, I was trying to think of just the most ridiculous, useless thing that nobody would hoard. It was just supposed to be the symbol of panic and helplessness. And then, that really started happening. And it was just really eerie. I think there's a scene, it's kind of an extended scene, that part of the book is set at this wedding that happens 2 years. It happens at the beginning of the shadowless epidemic, which is 2 years before the rest of the book happens. But that for me, I think, was the most poignant thing, because especially here in the US, I think that a lot of people didn't really understand how serious this was going to be until it was right on us. And that is how the characters at that wedding kind of very innocently act as well. I mean, they're all at this wedding. I think at that point, the shadowless pandemic had taken over like Panama and Brazil and a couple of East Asian countries. And they're just at a wedding drinking champagne. And then all of a sudden it's in Boston. And,
Yeah, no, as I say, I thought there was a lot that struck home, as you say, quite eerily to what's happening now. And your next book coming out next year is The Cartographers. Are you able to tell us a bit about that at the moment, or not allowed to?
I can. Yeah, I can. We are. I think I have one more big revision on it, so it's not totally done yet. But it is about some cartographers. And it's about a young woman who finds a map in her father's thing. Her father's just passed away, and she finds a map in his things that seems like worthless. It's just like a tourist map. But then a bunch of strange things start happening, and she very quickly realizes that this map is actually incredibly valuable and incredibly rare, and a lot of people are after it, but she doesn't know why. And so the book is a kind of a mystery about why this map is so valuable.
So,
Nice.
sounds like a brilliant concept.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And so obviously you're working on that right now, and you're doing revisions. And how's the process going? And what's your thoughts on lockdown writing? Is it made it easier to do revisions, or is it made it harder?
I don't know if lockdown so much has been the really difficult thing, because I work from home already. I'm not really like a coffee shop writer or like a get in a group of writing friends and have a write in or whatever they're called. I pretty much just sit at my desk in my house. So that hasn't changed that much, but I think it's really true what they say about second books. They're so much harder, so much harder. So that has been really a challenge.
And have you had as well the challenge from the point of view of a deadline? Did you have to hand in the manuscript by a certain time?
I did, yeah. And it wasn't I feel like my editor was really generous with my deadline. She asked me how long it took to write the Book of M and revise it. And then I told her, and then they gave me the same amount of time. So it wasn't that it was any shorter or anything, which I know is usually what happens to people when they write their second books. It's, you had a zillion years to write your first book, and now you have, 6 months or 1 year or whatever. But it was more just, I think it's also that I chose to write a really plotty story, but I'm a pantser. So, the Book of M obviously has a plot, but it's a journey story, and it's primarily about the relationships of these characters and how much they love each other and can they find each other again. Whereas the Cartographers is very much a mystery, and so I have all these clues that I have to make sense, and I have to figure out who the villain is, and I have to figure out why this map is so valuable, and what is the secret, and that is very hard to do if you don't plan anything like me. So that I think that was the big thing, is that I am writing a very a much more tightly plotted mystery with the added pressure of it being a second book, and also lockdown. Like it's all it's
all happening at once. And was it a 2-book deal when you first signed for the Book of M, or did you go first to have to get a second deal once the first book had come out?
Yeah, the Book of M was a 1-book deal. I didn't have enough of any next idea, I think, to present anything, and so we just went with the 1-book deal. But I had such a great experience with William Morrow, who's the publisher, and I love my editor so much. And so I think about a month after the Book of M came out, I said to my agent, should we, just talk to her about a second book now? And so we wrote up a little pitch, which is also very hard to do if you don't plot. She said, we'll come up with a pitch. I was like, it's not how I work. I don't know how to do that. But I tried and gave her a couple of pages, and we talked about it, and she was really on board with the idea. And then that's so we sold the second book to her based on that pitch.
Cool. So you just it was kind of like was that on spec basically? You kind of like just pitched the idea, and they liked the idea so much that they bought the book. Yeah. Awesome.
And the Book of M, of course, was a huge success as well. Which what did it feel like when it started getting the acclaim that it did? I think it was named as the best book of the year by Amazon, Elle, Refinery 29, The Verge, and various other things as well. So
yeah, just unbelievable, really. I had no idea. To me, it was just my weird baby, and especially because it was kind of spread across multiple genres, and there were a lot of things that, like it's a pandemic story, but it's really just a love story, but there are these really kind of magical and also kind of scary things happening at the same time. And I didn't know if people were going to love all of that together, or if it was be too confusing and too strange. And so I was, not prepared at all for any of the amazing things that happen. So I'm just so grateful and still kind of mostly don't believe it.
And it's now also been sold for a TV show as well, which must be super exciting to know. I mean, what's happened with that? Is there anything that you can tell us? Are you involved in the writing of it at all, or what's happening?
We're not. It's not quite at that stage. I think they are in the process of looking for a writer now, and then the pandemic kind of shut everything down.
Yeah,
so I think we're still in the stage of looking for a writer, but everything is moving much more slowly because everyone's working from home and things like that. But I'm really excited to see who they find. And
is it something that you would like to be involved in terms of the writing, or is it the kind of thing where you think, actually, I've done my bit and I want someone who knows about TV stuff to do their bit? And how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that they should definitely find a screenwriter for the actor because I've never written a TV script before, and so I'm not the expert in that. I would be thrilled to give background information or just talk with them, but I don't think I would not be a good writer to write the script for my book.
Would you be interested in writing, doing a screenplay at some point in the future, or are you just not interested in screenplays? You just want to write prose?
I'm not sure. They seem they seem sort of fun because novel writing is such a solitary thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like eventually you do reach the point where you're giving it to your agent or your editor or your first readers to talk about that. But at that point, you've probably already been, writing this thing alone for like a whole year. And it sounds like, especially with TV, a lot of the writing happens in a group and they're all bouncing ideas off each other. And so that sounds really interesting and cool to me because it's so different than what I do. And it also seems like you just wouldn't get stuck as often because so much of novel writing is just sitting there trying to figure your way out of whatever hole you've gotten yourself into. There's nobody to ask about it because nobody else has read what you've written. But if you were in a room with a bunch of other writers who knew the same story, you could just riff off each other. And I just think that momentum would be really fun.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I know sometimes that I'll get stuck in the thing and I'll try and speak to Tarek, but then I have to, it's difficult because he's not read the rest of it. So you have to kind of try and explain a huge aspect of it to then try and help get a solution out of it. So collaboration is good sometimes, I think, definitely. And also just staying on the TV thing a minute, I was just, the Book of M is something that, you've come up with these characters, you've created it in your head, and suddenly it's come to life in book form, and it's going to come to life on the TV. Are you apprehensive in any way about letting someone else play with these characters that, you lived with for so long when you were creating it? Or are you quite excited to see what they do with it?
I think just excited. What have I watched? It's been a book too. So I watched some of Game of Thrones, no spoilers, because I stopped watching the show. I stopped watching the show. I think I'm the only one in the world who stopped watching the show at the point that the books stopped.
Okay,
All right. Okay.
So I'm still like the first couple episodes of season 5. And then I'm going to wait for the books. And then I don't even actually know the end of the TV show. I managed to avoid it on the internet.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's impressive. I mean, I would say that for me, the show actually got a lot better once it moved away from the books, because I felt it kind of freed itself and it started moving a lot faster. And for me, I thought that's when it picked up quite a bit. So it'd be interesting. But I've never read the books at all, so I don't know how it compares at all.
I mean, you could be waiting forever to watch the end of the TV show.
Okay, no, I don't mind. I mean, I don't mind waiting. I just, because I started with, maybe I'd feel differently if I'd started with the TV show, but I started with the book. So I want to read the story as a book first.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say about that is, so I've read the Song of Ice and Fire series, and I've seen most of the TV show, and then the same with The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
And in both instances, when the shows started, everything was so different than how I'd been picturing when I read. I mean, just so different. And by, a couple episodes, the first couple episodes were just really jarring and confusing. And I just kept thinking like that's not how I saw this character. It's not really how I thought they would sound or what they would look like. And then after a couple episodes, I was just so invested, and it was such a neat other way to look at this story, And so I just think the whole thing was just, the whole experience was just deepened for me rather than, clashing with each other. So I think, but I'm hoping the same thing would happen with the Book of M, that I would just be very surprised with everything that, the actors or the settings or whatever, but I would in the end just end up, loving it for that difference.
Yeah. We were actually having a chat earlier on just before we started about The Leftovers. And that's a show which I think actually your book reminded me a lot of, that same kind of worldwide impact, but on a character level, not on a epic level. It's like a character study, and I loved the TV show, and I read the book after I'd watched the show, and I enjoyed the book a lot. But I totally get what you mean, that the TV show it took the premise of it and it used the longer running time, etc., to really expand the whole idea of what would happen if 3% of the world vanished, and to take it into far further than the book ever did. And I enjoyed the book a lot, but I think I actually liked the TV show more because it had the opportunity to go a lot deeper. So I think there's always the risk that the TV show is not as good as the book, but it could be a really nice companion and that really expands it in a way that you couldn't do in the book.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very exciting.
And so, I mean, you're working on revisions for the cartographers, but you don't need to tell us the name of it or anything, but have you got an idea for your next book? Have you started on your next book, or is something in your head?
I have the kind of the barest idea of a premise. That's always how it starts for me. I usually get a premise first, and then I have to figure out who are the characters in it and what's the story. And so I'm just sitting on this premise because I can't work on multiple things at once very well. I just feel like I end up doing them all badly. And so I'm waiting to start on it properly until the cartographers is, fully into production, and I'm not doing any edits on it anymore because I don't think I could juggle them that well. So it's sort of frustrating because it's exciting and it's the shiny new idea and you want to get started, but it's also kind of nice because by the time you reach, the final revision with the book you're working on, you're excited for it, but you're very tired. It's a big, a novel is just a huge amount of work. And so I get to keep this little shiny new idea and it's going to stay in its shiny, it's probably going to stay that way for at least a couple more months. And so it just gets to be all fun and not scary and difficult yet. So that's it's sort of fun.
It's always that moment of you've got this idea in your head and you know how it makes you feel, whatever, and you're like, and then when it comes to trying to translate that onto the page, and you're like, it's not working, and it's a lot harder. But you're right, with that moment before you start writing is the best time because it's a perfect story. Yeah, and as long as it stays in there, it'll always be perfect.
It's just perfect.
I just need to put this on the page. It must be easy.
Oh yeah,
good deal. Yeah.
And I also find with somehow when I get a new idea, I'm think about it and sort of say that's brilliant. You're somehow more attracted to that idea than working on the revision of whatever it is that you're working on.
Oh, crap! What am I doing with this rubbish? This is where it's at.
Yeah, exactly. What was the last book that you read?
Oh, the last book that I read, it was called Black Sun. I think it's not out yet for another maybe week or two. I mean, it's coming out. So whenever this podcast airs, it comes out in mid-October. So it is fantastic. It is the first book. It's by Rebecca Roanhorse, and it's the first book in a fantasy trilogy. And it was the book, I read it to blurb it. And it was the book that finally got me started reading again. Brilliant. Kind of during the pandemic, because in the beginning I was having, I think a lot of people were having a lot of trouble focusing and reading. And I had spent the first month or two, maybe even 3, just kind of trying to start books and bouncing off of them and feeling really terrible because I wanted to read and I wanted to get lost in a world, but I just wasn't able to calm down enough to immerse. And her editor sent me the advanced reader copy, and I opened it expecting to not be able to handle it and not be able to finish it to write the blurb. And I read it in like 2 days. Nice. It was just like, I forgot to eat. I didn't go to bed on time. It's so engrossing and so it's so great.
Brilliant.
Black Sun, is that what it's called?
Yeah, Black Sun.
Black Sun. And do you get sent quite a lot of books now? Now you've had your first book out there, do you get asked to do that quite a lot? Is that quite a responsibility you feel that you should do that to help people?
I really like to, because blurbs are such a terrifying part of the publication process, and I remember being so stressed out and nervous that to find even just like one person that would blurb my book. And so I try to, unless I'm really, really late on a deadline or something, I try to accept almost everything, to read that is asked of me. And if I can finish the book, then I try to offer a blurb.
Nice.
And I love it, because you're getting a sneak peek, and then you get the chance to say something about a book that you love, that you read and you loved, and I think it's really fun.
What happens I think I was going to ask the same thing as you. What happens if you get sent a book that you end up, it doesn't connect with you? How do you deal with that, nicely?
Yeah. Well, so I would never blurb something that I didn't finish. I have to read the whole thing.
Okay.
And so usually if I'm not connecting with it, I'm not able to make it to the end. And then it usually ends up being a function of deadline, because some people send the books very early, but sometimes you don't actually have a lot of time to read it. And so if I'm struggling to finish the book, and I know that it's not really going to be for me, and that I might not be able to give a good blurb, it usually just ends up that I kind of accidentally run out the time trying to reach the end anyway. And then I always email and say, I'm sorry, but I just wasn't able to finish it. But I wish the book all the best. And I don't like doing that.
No, of course
I also
not.
don't want to. I think it wouldn't help anyone for people to blurb books that they didn't connect with.
It kind of cheapens the whole point of it, doesn't it? The point of it is that it's meant to be a genuine thought or genuine appreciation of a book that you've read. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and if I don't connect with the book, I'm not going to praise it in a way that is going to tell readers if it's the book for them also.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I don't, it's always a little awkward. It doesn't happen that often, actually, but it's awkward, but I would rather do it that way than offer a blurb that doesn't help the author either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what about the last film that you watched?
The last film, Searching.
Was that the
John Cho movie?
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
So
I remember going to it in the cinema and not having much expectation with it, but I didn't but I couldn't believe how good it was. For the concept of it is, they stretch it. They make it so imaginative how they do this whole film from just search bars or internet screens, blah blah. It's so well done. It's genuinely a really good film. Yeah.
I'm a structure nerd for like books, movies, anything that has like an interesting structure or jumps in time or some kind of a frame. I love that. And so I went into it. That's why I wanted to watch it so bad. And I remember thinking the same as you, like, how are they possibly going to pull it off when the whole movie is just a computer screen and it's only things you can do on a computer screen that can tell a kidnapping mystery, and they did it, and it's so good.
It's amazing how well it works. Yeah, it's definitely worth a watch if anyone hasn't seen it.
And what was the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
Last TV show. I'm about to start. I don't know how I'm so late on all these things. I'm about to start the final season of Schitt's Creek and the final season of The Good Place. And I've also managed to not know the end either of them.
I mean, do you just not go on the internet at all?
I'm really good at. I have a lot of self-control at not looking at the spoilers myself because I really don't like spoilers. I'm very anti-spoiler. And then ahead of these kinds of things, I just go through Twitter and mute all the keywords I can think of, and take care of most of it. Yeah.
And the very last thing we always do is a super quick either or. So you just have to pick one, and there's no right answer apart from one question, which we'll come back to. So first one is Station 11 or The Passage.
Oh man, I read them both and I love them both. Station 11. No, Passage. The Passage.
Fair enough.
TV or cinema?
TV.
Fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Takeaway.
Well, this is Tarek's question. This is the one you can get right or wrong in his view. Real book or ebook?
Oh, real book.
Incorrect, I'm afraid. Sorry, I was going to bring this to an end.
You know what it is about real books? I like to be able to see how much is left.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a percentage of the book.
I know, but it's not. It doesn't make as much
more accurate. It's way more accurate.
So Peng must be the only person in the world, I think, that doesn't know how Game of Thrones ended.
I'll be honest, I am amazed how she's managed to avoid any spoilers.
It's incredible. I mean, whenever I've tried to use mute on Twitter, it doesn't seem to do anything.
No, I obviously don't do it properly because I find if the only way I can do it is just avoid the internet.
Yeah, that's right.
However, 6 weeks, however long I'm waiting for a film to come out.
Delete Twitter, delete Chrome, delete everything. Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully she'll enjoy it if she ever gets to watch it, because she's relying on the books being finished first.
It might be a while.
Yeah, exactly.
It might be a few years before she gets to watch it.
But I really enjoyed that chat with Peng. I thought it was really interesting. And also, as I said, half hate her because of the way that she got picked up and got a publisher so quickly.
I think I might be the fastest person I've ever heard of. It was, I mean, the novel is fantastic.
Yeah, it is,
I can totally see why it got snapped up, and it's in some ways, I suppose it's nice to see that is still possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you hear a lot of horror stories going the other way. So it's incredible.
And I suppose it's one of these things as well that I'm saying that she got, it had a very quick process, which she did, but it's as ever, it's sort of like at the end of a long process. She went through the creative writing course, she wrote another book and then revised that book. So, there's a lot that goes on into these overnight success type ththings.
So true. All you ever hear is the end result. You don't ever hear about the years that went into the point before submission, etc. Yeah.
But I like genuinely, if you haven't picked up the Book of M, I would highly recommend it if it sounds like your sort of thing, because it's great. And as you say, Tarek, I can totally understand how an agent picking up that manuscript and reading that first chapter goes, this is good. I want a bit of this. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. So thanks very much to Peng for coming on to the podcast and taking the time to speak to us. We really enjoyed that. Next week, we've got another great guest.
We do. Next week, we are chatting with Mr. Joe Abercrombie, the fantasy author magnifique.
Yeah, the author of the first Law trilogy. The Blade itself was his first book, and more recently he's got a new trilogy. He's in the midst of that, the Age of Madness trilogy, which is, I think the most recent book is The Trouble with Peace. But they're really great fantasy novels. Even if you're not the sort of person that thinks I want to read a fantasy novel, they're both very grounded and very humorous as well. The characters are very realistic, but also just darkly humorous, and sort of quite a lot of them are pretty despicable sort of people, but they're enjoyable to read.
Yeah, I've been listening to them on Audible, on the audiobook version, and the guy doing the Audible versions is fantastic. So if you're thinking of audiobook versions, he does a great reading of them. But they're fantastic books. Definitely recommend picking those up, and definitely recommend tuning in next week to hear what Joe himself has to say about him, and absolutely
also how he moved. He was a TV and film editor, and then moved into writing. So that's an interesting path that he's had as well. Before we go, I just want to say again, thank you for tuning in for our 50th episode. If you enjoyed it, it really helps if you're able to leave a quick review and rating on your podcast app. It really helps us climb the charts, which helps us to continue to get these great guests. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.